And welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to the Audacious podcast. I'm Talon Volme, your host of the show. It is good to be in the studio. Today I have two wonderful guests with me. I have with me Baily
Vennie.
Oh, close there. It's good to have you on the podcast.
It's good to be here.
I also have Kourtney McKay.
Yes.
How are you doing today?
I'm so excited.
Yes, let's go.
Yeah.
And the topic for today's episode, this is week 4 of our Help and Healing series, and we are going to be diving into the importance of self-forgiveness. When we think of forgiveness, it's easy to think immediately of forgiving others of the wrongs that they've committed towards us, but something that is as equally as important is forgiving ourselves, showing ourselves grace. And that can be one of the hardest things to do at times because we have such big inner critics. We are so easy to look down on ourselves more than other people. So we're going to be diving into how to forgive ourselves, why it's important, and how we can live in a healthy lifestyle going through that process of self-forgiveness. Really excited for today's episode. Before we do dive into the main topic of it, though, I do want to introduce my two guests a little bit better. So Kourtney, if you would, go ahead and tell us your major, your hometown, and your dream job that you had as a kid.
Oh, okay. So I'm a special ed major. My hometown is Florence, South Carolina. And then my dream job, if you would have asked me when I was like little, it would be to be a cashier at Baily. Yeah.
Come on.
Yeah. I don't know, none of y'all are from South Carolina, I don't think so.
No.
But there's this thing called Adventure in Columbia, and it's like a children's museum. And they had like a mock like grocery store, and I would literally go to Adventure just to stay in the grocery store for hours. So yeah, a cashier.
That's amazing.
That's awesome.
That's
Yeah.
goals. Come on now. It's good to have you on the podcast.
Thanks.
And Baily, how about you? What is your major, your hometown, and where do you see yourself 5 years from now?
Okay. So my major is Homeland Security, Emergency Service Management. My hometown is Tafton, Pennsylvania. If you have ever seen the TV show The Office, I'm about 30 minutes from Scranton, Pennsylvania. It's a real place. And then where I see myself in 5 years is either working for like Pennsylvania State Police or hopefully, God willing, like DEA, FBI, CIA, something like that.
Dude, come on. Let's go. That's
Yeah.
awesome. And I do have one more question for each of you, staple question of the podcast. And Baily, we'll actually start with you this time.
Okay.
Go ahead and tell us your hottest take.
Okay. My hottest take is that hitting a baseball is the hardest thing that any athlete can do. Hardest thing in
Really?
sports. Yeah.
Really?
That's
Yeah.
very interesting.
Harder than any like Olympic sport,
Yeah.
such as like the pole vaults? Come on now.
Yeah, so stuff like that's super difficult. It's super difficult. But I mean, hitting a 100-mile-an-hour baseball,
Okay.
like little 3-inch, if not smaller, I don't know the size, a little white ball coming at you in the sunlight with a bat that's just about the same exact size and hitting it 450 feet is, I think that's the hardest thing. I used to play baseball.
Okay.
And man, I could not hit. I was good in the field, could not hit. So
Dang. Wow. Okay. I would agree that it's very hard, but I don't know about like the hardest like athletic feat ever achievable because some things in other sports are ridiculously tough.
yeah,
You do have to admit that. But there is a level also from like minor league to major league where I think
Yeah.
it gets harder because you get better pitchers.
yeah, definitely. Like
Right.
hitting a curveball,
Yeah.
I just don't think a regular athlete, I don't think someone outside of baseball could come in and hit an 85-mile-an-hour curveball with 18 inches of break on it.
Probably not.
It's not happening. It's not happening.
That's fair.
Yeah.
Wow. That's an interesting take.
Yeah.
That's crazy. Kourtney, how about you? What is your hottest take?
My hottest take is that Buc-ee's is the
Nope.
Oh boy, we are getting it started. We're
That-
getting it started.
Buc-ee's is the only thing that a small town or any town in general really ever needs. Buc-ee's is a one-stop shop for everything.
Just any town you put a Buc-ee's in there
You're
and
set.
you're set.
You're set.
Really?
Oh, why?
Oh.
Why do you think that?
Okay, so right as you walk in, like up to like I guess the doors of Buc-ee's, you see like a bunch of things sitting outside. So like for instance, this is what I tell people. You need to go, like, it's deer season. You forgot that you need a stand, Buc-ee's has it. A fire pit,
Yeah.
Buc-ee's has it.
Right. A Buc-ee-sponsored fire pit.
Yeah.
Where all of the stones
A grill.
surrounding the fire pit is just Buc-ee's face.
A grill, Buc-ee's has it.
Yep.
Home decor,
Yep.
Buc-ee's has it. And it's not Buc-ee's stuff. It's, like, nice stuff. Like, it's literally like a Walmart and a Target and a gas station. And every other thing combined is in one. It's a lot.
They do have some good stuff.
I will say this is the second hottest take we've had about Buc-ee's on the show.
Interesting.
Wow.
The first one we had was episode 5 with Mason Leonard,
I think I heard that one.
where he said that he gets more excited to go to Buc-ee's than to Disney World.
See, I'm not that
Wow.
crazy.
Yeah.
That's bold.
That's bold, isn't
That's
it?
bold.
It is.
That's bold.
But here's the thing.
Oh.
Buc-ee's is like the definition of American consumerism. You go to Buc-ee's and you don't need half of the stuff you pick up, but
is
you
true.
see a Buc-ee's face and it's like, oh, I didn't know they had Buc-ee's playing cards. I didn't know they had a
need a
Buc-ee's
pair- I
water
need a
bowl.
deck of Buc-ee's
I
playing
didn't know
cards
they
now."
had a Buc-ee's pinball machine. Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
And now that you see that, they've reeled you in. And you're spending all this money that you don't really need to spend.
That's true. But
That is true.
but
But
you get a joy for being at the Buc-ee's.
There is joy. There is definitely
Yes.
joy.
but you also get unbelievable traffic from the Buc-ee's.
See, I think it just depends on what time you go and which one you go to.
See, I've only been to one Buc-ee's once, and it was like 1 p.m. on a Sunday.
Yeah.
And that joker was slammed. I mean,
Yep.
it took me probably 8 to 10 minutes to get in and get a parking spot.
Yeah. Well, Anderson's getting a Buc-ee's.
Yeah, I heard
supposedly.
this.
And my goal is to be the first
A
customer.
cashier at the Buc-ee's.
Honestly, if teaching doesn't work out, a career at Buc-ee's.
Your life goal of being
I
a
mean,
cashier
Your
at a
here's the
dream.
thing.
Your dream
Your
from
dream.
a kid. Come on now.
Cashier, yeah. A manager at Buc-ee's gets paid like $135,000 a year. That's like more than I would make
W.
being a teacher. So it's like if the teaching career doesn't work out,
Right.
I have a career at Buc-ee's waiting for me.
Right.
Yeah.
Got to build your customer service resume now.
Yeah. Exactly.
Right. Interesting. I think from the practical standpoint, Buc-ee's, it's a craze. It definitely is a craze.
is a
And
craze.
I've looked at that craze and I've stayed back and said, I
That's
will
fair.
not get reeled
That's fair.
in.
Yeah.
That's fair.
I
But
can appreciate that.
I can forgive you for having that take.
Yeah. Self-forgiveness.
Yep.
Self-forgiveness.
Speaking of forgiveness, self-forgiveness, just thinking about it, it's hard to forgive ourselves, but it's so necessary. Because when we don't forgive ourselves for things that we've done in the past, that's a grudge that we hold against ourselves for the rest of our life. And on the surface, that might not seem like much, but that can lead to thoughts, demeaning thoughts of ourselves, right? Just continually talking down to ourselves because we can't let that thing that we did in the past slide. We can't ever forgive ourselves from it. And that is so hurtful to people's lives. But for self-forgiveness, it's so much harder for us to do it than with other people. Yeah. And I just want to open up with this question, why? Why is it so much harder for people to forgive ourselves rather than someone else?
Yeah, I think that it's harder to forgive ourselves than other people because we want those other people to like us. So in my opinion, in some of my experience, if you're in a friend group and there's an issue between you and one of the other people in the friend group, it's easier for you to forgive them than for you to accept that maybe you were in the wrong and forgive yourself because you still want that person to like you and respect you and think highly of you. So if you kind of step back and say, oh, well, I forgive you, let's kind of let it wash over, then you can still kind of hold on to that friendship in a way that forgiving yourself kind of lingers a lot of the time.
Yeah.
And it kind of gets put off. You don't want like a grudge to build up in a friendship, but oftentimes we kind of let it like boil up in ourselves.
That's a good point.
Yeah, I think it boils down to like two things. One being like when you have to self-forgive, you have to acknowledge that there was something in your life that didn't go right or that like you need to bring to the surface, and I think that's hard sometimes to bring things to surface in your own life. And then I think the second thing would be like for me, I'm an Enneagram 2, and so it's all about like serving others and like having others' needs first. And I think oftentimes like we try to go and see other people's needs before we go and see ours. And so if I see like somebody's like hurting, I want to like make sure that they're okay, or like someone did like me wrong, I'm gonna forgive them fast because I don't want to like, kind of you're talking about like lose a friendship or like even just make it worse. It's just easier to forgive than like to actually address the problem sometimes. And I think also it's like harder for us to actually truthfully forgive and not just say that you're forgiven.
Yeah.
But
Yeah, that's a great point because, love is service. So, of course, when we are embodying the love of Christ, we are wanting to serve others and we are wanting to do things for the kingdom of God. But that service, if we're not careful, can lead to a point where it is no longer loving ourselves as well. Yeah. And we are starting to compromise. We are starting to cut corners to where our own health, be it physical, mental, emotional, spiritual, is starting to turn for the worse because of how much we're pushing ourselves. That can be true for forgiveness. That can be true for service or just being physically present with other people. How can we keep ourselves from sliding down that path to where we're giving too much and we're suffering as a result of that?
I think boundaries are good. I have not been very good at this at all, and I think in the last year, just like learning how to set boundaries for yourself. I think it's a conversation that you should have like with yourself and also with God of like, what is too far for me? And what's a healthy spot that I'm not going to let this person get this close to this, or that I can remove myself from the situation and be like, this is too much for me. I don't want to be a part of this. I think that's one step in going in the right direction, is truthfully like setting boundaries for yourself.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like that. I think to kind of step on that as well would be not only boundaries, but also expectations for not just how you converse with yourself, but also how you interact with other people. So to like have the expectation of forgiveness with someone is just as important as it is to have that expectation with yourself. So like to not get pushed too far, to kind of have the expectation that going into a friendship or a relationship, already expecting that there'll be a time when you're going to need to forgive someone lets you be prepared for that and be able to forgive them, but also to see it and not let yourself get walked on by it, because you already have the boundaries set up and you already have the expectations that interactions that might not be the most comfortable or conversations that might not be the easiest in the way of forgiveness are going to happen at some point. It's human nature that someone will do something you don't like and you'll have to forgive them for it at some point.
Yeah.
So having boundaries that you can operate in and expectations that you can be prepared for.
Yeah, there you go. That's great. Boundaries, expectations, and I'd also say moments of rest and reflection are so good for that. Because when you do sit down and rest and ask yourself, how is my life right now? Am I doing the things that I want to be doing, but also am I giving myself the rest and nourishment that I need to be giving myself? It can help for service. It can also help for forgiveness, because sometimes we don't even realize that we're holding a grudge against ourselves until we sit down and ask the question, am I still upset and mad at myself over something? Am I still not forgiving myself over something? And I think one of the things that can lead to that is the high expectations that we can set for ourselves, sometimes unrealistically. We want to perform at the best that we can. It's just a natural drive that we have as people. Yeah. But sometimes, a lot of times, we can push those expectations way too far and hold ourselves at a standard that we will never be able to meet. How do we handle that?
Yeah. A big part, I guess, of my testimony would be the fact that I did set really high expectations for myself, and I chased so much for perfection. And I think the fact that I chased for perfection really hurt my sense of, like, who I was, who God, like, intended me to be, and also, like, just my relationship with God in general, because I had this false reality that, like, in order for God to love me, I had to do this, this, and this, or I had to be this good at this, and all of these things that I personally could never attain or even, like, amount up to. And so because of that, I did, like, hurt myself. And I had to realize that, like, in those moments, it was just, like, I think I shoved it down so far that, like, I didn't want to bring them up. And it truthfully wasn't until, like, camp this summer that I realized, like, all these things that I was, like, telling myself are so not true, and that, like, my worth is only found in Christ alone, and that because of that, like, I can find freedom in the fact that I don't have to be perfect. And truthfully, like, mentors are so good, and, like, people to, like, pour into you to see the things that, like, you don't see at all. But yeah.
Yeah, I think that breaking down your standards in moments of rest and reflection, like you were talking about, is super good. Because a lot of the time you don't realize what you're actually feeling, because in the society we live in, it's so go, 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 go all the time.
Yes.
And anybody, I'll just say anybody, is going to hold themselves to some standard. And a lot of the time, I also think you're right that people find themselves holding themselves to a standard that's too high. I've found myself doing that before as well. And you don't realize all the time. And I think moments of rest and reflection are super important, to realize that your standard should only be to be after the heart of the Lord, to be after his heart and his will and his kingdom, and that any other standard is something that is going to be created by the flesh on this world and is going to stay in the flesh on this world.
Yeah, that's a great point. Yeah, knowing our limits too can be a huge help. Knowing that we are limited human beings, that we need rest, we need sleep, we have boundaries and limits to our energy, because we are not like God. We are not able to be everywhere at once, do everything at once. So knowing that we are limited can help out a lot when that desire to do more and to reach those expectations hits. Yeah. We've talked a lot about the problem, right, that leads to the reluctance to forgive ourselves for all these problems. So we diagnosed it. But practically speaking, it's a hard process. I think a lot of people can think forgiveness is something that happens in an instant and then it's done. Why is that not necessarily the case?
Yeah, I just don't think that's the case, because as much as someone can surface level say, I forgive myself, like if I go do something I'm not supposed to do, I can say right away, oh, I forgive myself, I won't do whatever it is again. But to actually sit down and to think and to actually reflect on what is going on and what you need to forgive yourself for is something that is a lot deeper than just kind of buzzing through your own head real quick. Oh, I forgive myself, I can move on. I think that because we live in a way where we forgive everybody for everything instantly, we can also forgive ourselves for everything instantly in a way that we just kind of say we forgive ourselves. But the process of actually sitting down and being in forgiveness and being in the moment of what happened and what forgiveness is needed for is something that isn't instant, because it's not a light process. It's something that sits really heavy on a lot of people. I know self-forgiveness sits really heavy on me a lot of the time, and it's something that as much as I would love to just be able to say, oh, I forgive myself and truly mean it, the actual intent of forgiving myself is a heavier process than just oh, it's okay, I forgive myself type of statement.
Yeah. I think it's also good to, like, acknowledge that it's not a one and done type thing. Like, you can't just be like, oh, I forgive myself. And it's a process. It takes a long time. And, like, I'm not going to say that, like, God couldn't just heal you in an instant, because he has every power and right to do that. But it's also good to be, like, acknowledge that it may not happen like that for you. And, like, for me, it was not like oh, I forgive myself and then therefore I'm just going to continue to live my life. But it was more of like, okay, I actually had to realize that everything that I've been telling myself, number one, is not true at all. And then having to like relearn the things that I was telling myself. That's like a huge part of like, I guess self-forgiveness is like one, acknowledging like whatever happened in your life and what you told, but also like reteaching yourself what you've been telling yourself for a while, or the ways in which you've been like acting. And then from that, like prayer is so hard too, of like, because you have to actually admitting there's a problem. And I think for me, like admitting that I need help, that's a lot. And I really wish that this culture wouldn't see like asking for help as such a hard thing, but it is. And
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, asking for help, prayer, both such great things. But ultimately, self-forgiveness is an internal battle. Yeah. We're not going to forgive ourselves unless we choose to, and unless we keep choosing to, walking down that process. And I know it looks different for different people, but practically speaking, how do you start that process of self-forgiveness? And then how do you continue that and make sure you're not sliding back into unforgiveness towards yourself?
Yeah. In my family, we always kind of joked that like the first step is admitting you have a problem. Like my dad was sitting on the couch, falling asleep watching TV, and we try and change the channel. And he goes, "Oh, I'm watching that." It's like the first step's admitting you have a problem. Like you were asleep. Let me change the channel. Yeah. So I think that you're right when you said before that actually admitting that you need to forgive yourself is so important. I think that within me, that's how I start, is I need to sit down, and if I need to grab a friend or a mentor or a buddy or whoever and say it out loud, like, this is what I need forgiveness for in myself, or if that's something that I need to do alone. I just think that the first step is stopping and admitting that you need to forgive yourself for something, and then spending intentional time in prayer and giving that to the Lord because he wants it. Good, bad, sideways, up, down, he wants it. So admitting that you need to forgive yourself, giving that to the Lord continually, and day after day, week after week, month after month, or whatever it is, continually giving that to the Lord, and then realizing that if he can forgive you, you can forgive yourself, because we're called to live like Christ who forgave. And if he can forgive you, then you should forgive yourself. As hard as that is, I think that if you sit in that and with that for however long it takes you in a specific situation, that you can come to find self-forgiveness.
Yeah. The point about like Jesus forgiving you so you can forgive yourself, that was like a really big thing that like I was thinking about. Is like, Christ already forgave me, so like why can't I forgive myself? And that's like a big like, that's what I like always try to think of, is like when I'm going through this process of self-forgiveness, it's like in prayer being like, God, I know you've already forgiven me, teach me how to forgive myself. Because through that, like, Jesus will show you the ways in which like you need to be healed, and what that looks like for you. But also like I go to Hope, and so Hope Fellowship Church, and in our college study we're doing like a Bible study that our college pastor has like written out, and one of the weeks was about silence and how we don't like silence because in silence it becomes confrontational, because God will reveal to us like the things in which like we need help in, or the things that need to be brought to light. And so one of the things that like he wrote in there was, what do I need, like talking about silence, it's like, what do I need to forgive or resolve within myself in order that I can grow towards Christ, so I can be and look more like him, and I can live the life in which he called me to be. And so that's kind of a question that like I ask myself when I feel like I am slipping back into a state of like, I guess, feeding myself everything that I've worked so hard to get out of. It's like, okay, number one, why are you saying this? That's truly the devil that's like getting back in into my head, because he sees how hard I'm trying not to do that, but also of like, okay, what do I need to do in order to like not slip back into this? Is that like reaching out to someone and like an accountability partner. Like, hey, I'm struggling with this. Will you pray for me, as well as like me praying for myself? Spending time in prayer, like asking God, like, God, I know you've forgiven me. Help me forgive myself and teach me how to do that. But also, like, literally just sitting in silence, because in silence is where you find a lot of the answers that you need. And I'm really bad at silence because I really love to talk. But, yeah, it's hard.
Yeah. Yeah, it's so hard to continue to walk through that process and not become indifferent towards it and not let that slide back in. And I also really believe that the emotions that are brought up when you think about the past event and what you're trying to forgive yourself for, the emotions that are brought up as a result of remembering it can be a huge indicator of whether or not you're on that journey to forgive yourself from it.
Don't ignore it.
Exactly, right?
Yeah.
When you think of it and all of these thoughts of anger, frustration, regret still come up, then you haven't forgiven yourself over it. If you're telling yourself things like, oh, I can't believe I did this, I should have never done that, I can't believe how rotten a person I am, that's not conviction. That's condemnation.
Yeah.
It's so easy for us to get the two mixed together because they can be similar in some places, but conviction comes out of a place of love, comes from God. Condemnation comes out of a place of hate. It's from the enemy. So when you're hearing things such as, you are such a rotten person, I can't believe you would have did that, right? How could you have done that? You'll never be good enough to get past that. That's the enemy. That's the devil speaking to you. And how can we make sure that we're treating ourselves right with that? You know, thinking positively on it and thinking from a place of love rather than hate.
I think that when it comes to like the challenge of condemnation and conviction, I think that shame plays a huge part in that. In a path of conviction, you shouldn't feel bad for yourself while you're on that.
What do you mean by that?
If you've been in sin and you are on a path of conviction, in my experience, it's been more of acknowledgement and thanks to the Lord that's been brought to light inside myself. Whereas if I've been in sin and the Lord brings it to me, I've been able to be thankful that he's brought it to me so that I can continue to turn that over to him and move forward. Whereas when it comes to condemnation, you're hearing all these things that make you feel bad for yourself or about yourself. And I think that's really where the difference lies in those two parts of, or internal conversations, you could say. Where if you're feeling bad for yourself, if you're getting down on yourself, that's probably condemnation in a way that you're trying to be held there in that thought of self-pity is the word I like to use.
Yeah.
You're being held there in that, whereas if you're in conviction, you're feeling what you have done and that's being brought to you, not brought against you, and then you can move forward from that. It's not trying to hold you there. That feeling is not trying to hold you there.
Yeah.
I feel like also conviction is a sense of like, okay, this is what I'm not doing so good on, and so like this is how I can get better. Of like, just like I think I was really convicted recently of like the amount of times I've taken my faith for granted, and I know this is like not about necessarily what we're talking about, but like how I've taken my faith for granted, and because of that, I'm like, okay, now I want to go about everything differently, and I want to like make sure that I'm like making my faith a priority, and that like I truly feel grateful for the fact that I was raised in a Christian home, and that all of these things have happened to me, and like for example, like my testimony is not like a crazy testimony, and I think sometimes people who don't have crazy testimonies think their testimony is not like important enough, but like that's so false, and like I should actually be grateful that like I didn't experience some of the things that people have, because like there is no like condemnation or shame in what people have like been through and like where they've came from, but also like I have a testimony of like this is how faithful the Lord has been in my life, therefore like I should praise him and be grateful for that, and not be like take for granted the fact that that's like how I was raised and what like went on in my life. But yeah, that was just when you were talking about conviction. came to my mind. But also I think of like when the question you asked was like how we go about it in love.
Yeah, how do we make sure that we're speaking to ourselves in love rather than out of hate?
Yeah. I think it's also just like speaking truth over yourself and like reminding yourself of who like you are to God. So it's like instead of being like the condemning aspect of be like, oh, you're unworthy, you're not loved, you're not perfect, you're never gonna amount to anything, like all these things, but instead of be like, no, like I am forgiven. I know I'm not perfect, but that's why Christ died for me. I know that through Jesus, I am enough. And like all these things of like speaking life over yourself instead of speaking death. Because that's so easy. Like the devil speaks death, Jesus speaks life. And like if I'm going to like go about seeking self-forgiveness, I need to start speaking life over myself because I can't like self-forgive myself in a state of darkness. Like that's just like not, you can't go anywhere. But also it's like, I don't know if you went to the Way of the Cross. That was like so crazy. Like Hope Fellowship did a Way of the Cross where it went through. There's like 13 steps of like the stage of like Jesus going to the cross and his like resurrection. And one of the parts was, I think it was like after Jesus had fallen, like the second or third time carrying the cross. And it was just talking about like all these people that like have done bad things to Jesus, and Jesus still like forgiven them. And like the whole point of him dying on the cross was forgiveness. And then it, like had a reflection of like forgiveness in your own life. And it like just stuck to me. Like I was almost in tears thinking about it. I was like, the question was, where's our focus? And it said, is our focus on the many times that we have fallen or failed Christ? Or are we focused on Christ's willingness and joy and raising us up when we fall? So I think in walking like walking towards self-forgiveness and love, it's like not focusing on everything we've done wrong and like fixating our mind on that, but realizing like we have done things that are wrong, but through Christ, like he picks us up when we fall and we can find hope and renewal in that, and like that's how we get out of a season like that.
Yeah, come on, so many good points there, so much to unpack with that. Yeah, remembering that our focus is so important in it, and that we can't focus on what we failed to do in the past, because when we get stuck in the past, we will miss the present and the present moments that Jesus was wanting to work in our life, right? Speaking truth over ourselves, because it is so important to remind ourselves of God's truth when so many lies can combat us from other directions. But I also love the point that you made about testimonies. Testimonies are so powerful, and they're so good because of people that God has worked in to where they have gone through that journey of self-forgiveness are able to speak truth into the lives of others and speak encouragement into their lives because they've been in that same place and they're able to encourage them. Yeah, self-forgiveness is actually a big part of my personal testimony. So there was a point in my life where I was in the church, but I wasn't living for the Lord. I was living as a part of the world, sort of going through the motions. And for a couple of months, I was praying a very simple prayer that the Lord would show hidden sin in my life so that I could become closer to him. And man, did he answer that prayer in a big way. Come on. Yeah, he will. He will always blow our expectations away when you ask that prayer, because in my life, there was so much that he showed me, this is sinful, this is wrong, you shouldn't be doing this. And I had no clue, absolutely no clue. And so when he opened my eyes to that and I saw all of that, it was so humbling. That conviction was hard to wrestle with, and that led to a point where I was struggling very much to forgive myself over that. Because especially when we've committed sins and we've done wrong to other people, we know our heart and we know everything that we did, whereas we don't know the situations of other people. And I think knowing everything that we know about ourselves, it can make it so much harder to forgive ourselves.
Yeah. I was watching like a TikTok clip or something like that, and it was something about like everyone having a sob story. And I think that is a big part of why we find it a lot easier to forgive other people, because we are able to look at the fact that there's stuff going on in their lives, and maybe the reason that whatever happened that we need to forgive them for was kind of just of a circumstance and not of like hatred or wanting to do wrongdoing from them. So it's easy to forgive them. But when we get to look at ourselves, we can see every single aspect of every situation that we're in, and we're able to, or it makes it a lot harder to just say, oh, I forgive you, and mean it. because we see, oh, I'm trying to forgive myself, but I'm doing this, and this at the same time. Or I'm trying to forgive myself, but I'm still saying this, or anything like that. We see every single aspect of our own lives while we don't see every aspect of others. And I think that I agree with what you're saying. That kind of makes it a lot easier to forgive other people than ourselves.
I feel like that also just plays a lot into comparison of, like, when you are going through the process of self-forgiveness, you can't, like, compare your journey of self-forgiveness to someone else's because no one is the same. And also it's just, like, Christ made us uniquely different. And so, like, where he has us in our stage of life may not be where he has someone else in their stage of life. And so, like, you can't forgive yourself when you're trying to forgive yourself in the same way that someone else is. And I think that's why I'm trying to be so careful with, like, what I say here is, like, because I know, like, what worked for me may not work for someone else.
Yeah, right.
But it's also, like, I just want this to be, like, an encouragement that, like, you are, like, if you are struggling with self-forgiveness, like, there is hope, and, like, we have come out of it, and, like, we're been in that process of self-forgiveness, and so we're, like, seeing the light at the end of the tunnel, whereas someone who maybe is still sitting in darkness, like, this is their opportunity to, like, see a light at the end of the tunnel and, like, work through that. But just wanted to point that out.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. It's so easy to look at other people's lives through different lenses than we look at our own. And when we look at our own through that lens of self-criticism and knowing exactly all the situations that we've been in, that can lead to or just almost this conflicting emotions that we have to where we want to forgive ourselves, but either we don't know how or it's just not working as much as we try to will ourselves to, right?
Yeah.
But something that always helps and will help anyone who is struggling with self-forgiveness is something that helped me, is that as you draw closer to God, his forgiveness will continue to become present in your life. Yeah. You may not see it instantly, but God wants to hear your struggles. God wants to be close to you. God wants to be with you in your life. He wants to have a relationship with you. And so when we spend time with him, we pour out our heart to him, we spend time in his word, we draw closer to him and we become more like his character. And God forgives all. Yeah. And so for me, it wasn't a process to where I could say, oh, suddenly it clicked in my mind and I understood and then I forgave myself. That's not how it went, right? It was a process of, as I drew closer and closer to God, I realized that those emotions of regret, of self-hatred, of condemnation were becoming less and less and less strong, less potent. Yeah. Do y'all have any thoughts on that, on how people can approach God with their struggles and self-forgiveness?
Yeah, definitely. To give an example, actually, I have a buddy who was in a season a couple months ago now. We were together, and at least my way of being able to start a process of self-forgiveness, I kind of made it be his way because we were spending so much time together, but was to be in each other's presence and to, like, speak stuff out loud to one another. And he kind of brought the word abide a couple weeks in a row. And I think that is something that is so important when it comes to drawing near to God, to truly abide in him in a process like self-forgiveness means to not only just pray that you can give something to him, but to actually live in and for him and to actually do it is to truly abide. And that when you are able to be in a state of abiding in the Lord, that the process of self-forgiveness can be so much easier. So drawing near to the Lord is so important. And I think for anyone who is trying to do that or feels like they should do that, or is looking for something when it comes to forgiving themselves, to really dive into a couple different passages that kind of have the context of abiding in the Lord and trying to learn what that really means and then start implementing that into their lives to see fruit from that.
Yeah, that's so good.
Yeah. Today in chapel, I think his name's Dr. Neil. I'm so sorry if that's not his name. But he was talking about, like, how he viewed God. and how we view God is how we view ourselves. And so I think if you're in the process of like drawing near to him, like ask yourself like, who is God to you? Because I feel like that is a great way to start, because if you don't view God in a good way, you're not going to view yourself in a good way, because we are God's creation. So if like I see God as love, that means he loves me, and that means I should love myself. And if I see God as a forgiving father, that means he forgave me, which means I should forgive myself. And so like I would say, first off, like ask yourself who God is to you. And once you figure out who God is and you go in the process of trying to draw closer to him, like read the word. Like through the word, you find so much peace, hope, comfort. And like through that, you can find a lot of the answers you're looking for. And then also like in prayer, and like your prayer life doesn't have to be like such a like powerful thing. The way we hear other people pray is not how we have to pray. Like I know people talk about like seeing God as like talk to God as if he's your friend. That sounds kind of cliche, but like actually like just talk to him. Like you don't have to have like all the right words to say. It doesn't have to be so eloquent. Just like be like, God, like help me. I need your help. I don't know what to do. Help me draw near to you. I think a prayer that I've been praying recently is like, God, like help me to desire you above all else. Like help me to seek you above all else. And just like, yeah, like after last night, I was just like, God, like I don't want to forget like what your presence feels like. So like, please like remind me of what that is, and don't even forget it, but also like help me desire you above everything, because you are so much better than the rest, and you're better than all the things that I tell myself. You're better than all the lies that like the enemy tries to tell me. You're better than what I see other people doing and I'm comparing myself to, and that's pushing me farther back than where I should be in you. Like truly just go into God like with your request. But yeah, that's where I would say like starting out. And then I just really love accountability. I know I've said that a couple of times, but like truly like I'm not a person that can sometimes stay on task. And so having someone to be like, Kourtney, are you doing this? Is like a good reminder that like this is where I should be heading. So like finding that person and finding someone you trust who's also like, don't just pick anyone, pick someone that's really strong in their faith and that you trust spiritually and not just as a friend.
Yeah, that's so good. Come on now. Yeah, I think we are running out of time for this podcast, unfortunately. But before we close, what's one piece of advice or encouragement that the two of you would like to leave the listeners for the week ahead?
Yeah, a piece of advice that I would say is that it is possible, because through God all things are possible, and that forgive others, learn to forgive yourself, learn how you forgive yourself, and then execute that when you need it.
Yeah. Amen.
Yeah. I honestly just like take 5 minutes in silence in prayer to be like, God, show me what is missing in my life. Show me where the gap needs to be filled. And like truly restore the parts of myself that need to be restored. Just like asking God what he needs to show you in the moment, because I feel like that is such a great start to everything we've been talking about, is like truly seeking God first above all else, because if we try to do this in our own power, we're going to get absolutely nowhere.
Yes.
So yeah, truly like seeking God first above all else, and then after that you can start the rest of everything else we talked about. But
yes,
yeah,
for sure. Such a good word. Well, Baily, Kourtney, thank you so much for joining me on today's episode of the Audacious podcast.
Yeah, man. Thank you for having us.
This has been absolutely great. Thank you all so much. And as always, I'm your host, Alan Bomi, hoping that you have a wonderful rest of your week, and we will catch you next time. Bye-bye.